It is because the family has distrust of the Mississippi law enforcement officials giving them a fair investigation where their black son ended up dead after going out on a boat with 3 young white men.
What's going on, people? So today's video, I wanted to talk about something that's been kind of weighing on me a little bit. Something that we seem to do every single time something terrible happens to somebody within our community. Before we know anything, before we have an autopsy, before there's any witness statement, before a single fact actually happens, we've already decided what's happened in our own mind. We've already started putting out a narrative about who's guilty, what happened, why it happened, and we got to stop. Look, I love my people, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this video, but I love my people in a way where I want to be able to tell them when I see us doing wrong. And look, I'm not special. I'm just another person out here. So before the usual suspects want to start calling me a sellout and an Uncle Tom and all the normal things that you hear from people on that side, hate me all you want, we don't care. Because I'm still going to keep it real with you. And I'm still going to tell you how I feel. So let's get into this, people. These are real families who suffered real losses. And they're not just abstract examples. They're recent, they're documented, and each one shows a different version of the same problem. What happens when the conclusions come before the evidence? What happens when we allow our skin color to be the lens we see through and the thing that guides our decision? So the first person I want to talk about is Trey Reed, 21-year-old Delta State student found hanging from a tree on his own campus in Cleveland, Mississippi. A discovery that immediately triggered memories of this country's ugliest history. Then we're going to talk about Karmelo Anthony, a case that went all the way through a trial with a jury, a verdict, and a sentence. And still the online conversations barely touch what actually happened in that courtroom. Then we want to talk about Nolan Wells. Now this case is still active, and the Grift is still running strong in my opinion. But a case where, as of this recording, we generally do not know the answer yet, where the entire narrative got built on a single photograph before any forensic evidence even existed, which is crazy. And then we'll round things up with Rick Chow, a gas station shooting that looked like an open and shut case within days until a trial revealed a far more complicated picture on both sides. So let me just also start off by saying this before we get into this. I'm not here to tell you what to think. That's not how I do my videos. I'm also not here to tell you how to feel about these 3 young men or their families or the people around them. That's not the point. I'm here to just make an argument that order matters. Evidence first, conclusion second, not the other way around. When we flip that order, when the internet decides the verdict before the courtroom, the coroner or the investigators do, we don't get justice faster. We just get it wrong, loudly, and then we move on before anyone corrects it. And that's the biggest issue I see. When all the evidence actually comes to light and people get to see the bigger picture, the race baiters, they just disappear. There's no, oh, we got it wrong, we apologize to the families that we might have impacted. They just disappear and they move on to the next group. So anyway, let's go case by case. Let's start with Trey Reed. On September 15th of 2025, Travian, I might have butchered that. Let's just call him Trey Reed. A 21-year-old student at Delta State University was found hanging from a tree near the pickleball courts right in the center of campus in Cleveland, Mississippi. The way his family found out made an already unbearable moment worse. The sheriff's department initially told them that Trey had died in his dorm room. It wasn't until they saw it on the news that they learned the truth. He had been found hanging from a tree in one of the most visible, high-traffic spots in the entire campus. Within days, the state medical examiner ruled the death a suicide. To a lot of people, that timeline alone raised questions. A young black man found hanging from a tree in Mississippi, and an official ruling delivered before his family had even had time to process what happened. That could raise some suspicions. I get it. Mississippi does have a history. But that still does not give people the right to push false narratives before one fact has been presented. There's another detail, and this just came out recently. According to the Mississippi Free Press, reporting from July 2026, based on interviews with Trey Reed's family, his girlfriend received text messages from his phone the night before his body was found, in which he had threatened to hang himself. That is them. But leaving this detail out wouldn't be telling the whole story. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump got involved, obviously. So did members of Congress, Benny Thompson, Ayaya Presley, another race baiter, and Colin Kaepernick, Know Your Rights Camp Autopsy Initiative agreed to fund an independent second autopsy for the family. Here's where things stand as of this recording. The independent autopsy still hasn't been released. I wonder why. The Reed family says they haven't heard from Crump's legal team since the start of this year. No new findings have overturned the medical examiner's ruling. Now, let me just stop here for a second. Why do y'all think Ben Crump has not reached out to this family? I mean, let's just keep it real. Ben Crump has been doing this for years. He goes to a grift. He raises all kinds of money, which I'm sure he gets a cut from whatever money he raises for these families. I could be wrong, and I'll apologize if I am, but I believe the way he does his work is he says, we'll raise you some funds for your family to help you through these trying times, and our legal services will be a percentage of those funds raised. That's the way I think he does work. But let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. If somebody knows officially how he does his work, then please leave it in the comments. But anyway, no confirmation has closed the door on the family's questions either. It is generally unresolved. And I want to be upfront about something before I even go any further. When a black man is found hanging from a tree in this country, the instinct to ask questions isn't paranoia. It's history. Lynching in America didn't stop being a threat just because it stopped being called that. There are documented cases going back decades where a hanging death was written off as a suicide when it wasn't. So when people look at Kyle's death and ask, are we sure? The questions deserve to be taken seriously. And it was. And here's what they found. No foul play. Rule consistent with suicide. And this is where I wanted to sit with something uncomfortable. The investigation happened, findings came back, and a lot of speculation didn't move an inch. People said the ruling came too fast. People said flatly, I don't believe a black man did this to himself. We literally are passing judgment because we don't believe that a black person would want to commit suicide or would hang themselves as a form of suicide. Really? Most of the people in this country have never experienced slavery. They've read about it in books. I mean, I said most. Nobody in this country that is still alive today has ever experienced slavery. But the way they talk about it, you think that they just got freed themselves. So anyway, I don't believe a black man did this to himself. Not based on a piece of contradicting evidence, but based on a belief that preceded the investigation and stayed fixed regardless of what the investigation found. That's the distinction I want you to hear. Taking the question seriously, that's not the grift. That's just being a reasonable citizen with a memory of history. The grift, however, is deciding you already know the answer before the evidence comes in, and then refusing to update no matter what comes back. But what it doesn't earn the right to do is reject the answer. Now let's look at a case that went all the way through the system. Anthony, then 17, stabbed and killed Austin Metcalf, another 17-year-old, at a track meet in Fresno, Texas. Metcalf was white, Anthony was black, and almost instantly before a single piece of evidence had been presented in court, this became a story about race. Anthony's own mother told the press conference, I don't know why we were being targeted and discriminated against before a fair trial. The case drew national attention, specifically because of who was on which side of the knife. But here's what actually happened. Once the case went to trial, prosecutors laid out the evidence, the defense argued self-defense, and a jury, not social media, not cable news, an actual jury that sat through the testimony rejected that defense. They convicted Anthony of murder, not manslaughter, murder. 35 years. That's what this boy got. The jury didn't rule based on who was what race. They ruled based on the stabbing, the injuries, testimony. The system did exactly what it was supposed to do. Look at facts, not identities. And that's the point. The racial framing didn't help Anthony because it was never actually relevant to what happened at that track meet. A kid is dead and another kid is in prison for 35 years, and none of that changes because of what race either of them is. The race angle didn't reveal truth. It just delayed people from looking at the actual truth, which was sitting right there in the evidence the whole time. That's the grift I'm talking about. Turning a tragedy into a referendum on race, when the facts were never about race to begin with. One more thing we're getting precise about. A lot of commentary online called this an all-white jury. That's not accurate. Yes, the panel did consist of 0 black jurors, but it included Hispanic, Asian, Middle Eastern, and Indian members too. During jury selection, prosecutors struck 3 black women, all of whom were educators, arguing that since the stabbing happened at a school athletic event involving school-aged kids, educators might be biased. The defense filed what's called a Batson challenge, arguing the standard wasn't applied evenly, since one juror who was kept was also technically an educator. The judge overseeing jury selection accepted the prosecution's race-neutral reasoning and denied the challenge. That doesn't mean the questions were unreasonable. It means legally, no discriminatory intent was proven. And there's a separate idea worth naming here too. The assumption that a jury of your peers has to mean a jury that looks like you. That's not what the phrase means at all. And conflating the two is part of how this story got more heated than the actual legal facts support it. Okay, let's talk about Nolan Wells, an 18-year-old kid out on a boat with his friends on the 4th of July, then stopped at Horn Island. Somehow Nolan doesn't make it back. Days later, his body's found in the water. Now here's where things get interesting. Within days, before an autopsy, before any evidence, before investigators said a single word about foul play, the story had already been written. Why? Because photos on the trip showed Nolan with a group of friends who were mostly white. That's it. That's the entire foundation of the narrative. Not a witness statement pointing to a crime, a mere photo of Nolan on a boat with 3 young white men. Incredible. And once that narrative takes hold, everything else gets reinterpreted to fit it. Friends give slightly different accounts of why Nolan stayed behind. Normal, messy, human inconsistencies that happen anytime multiple people recall the same night. And suddenly, that's not people remembering things differently. That's evidence of a cover-up. And it's still happening as the video comes together. A clip started circulating that mostly captured Nolan's last moments. Someone yelling in distress. It spread fast, got treated as evidence. Then a man who was actually on Horn Island that day, Trayston Shepard, told Rolling Stones that that voice yelling in that video was his, not Nolan's. And that Nolan doesn't even appear in the footage. That's not a side detail. That's the whole thesis of the video happening in real time. In the exact case we're talking about, while we're talking about it. Here's what actually happened. The independent autopsy came back undetermined. Investigators have not ruled out foul play, but haven't confirmed it either. As of right now, nobody knows how Nolan Wells died. Not me, not you, not the pundits who had figured it all out within 48 hours. And that's the actual problem I want to talk about. The assumption came first. The evidence, whatever it eventually shows, came second. And if it turns out that there was foul play, fine. Then the system needs to find that and prosecute. But the determination has to come from evidence, not from who was standing next to who in a photo. That's a narrative looking for facts to back it up, instead of the other way around. Lastly, let's talk about Rick Chow. On May 23rd in Columbia, South Carolina, Chow, a gas station owner, chased down 14-year-old Cyrus Carmack-Belton and shot him in the back, believing the teen had stolen 4 bottles of water. Within days, this looked about as clear as it gets. The sheriff himself said publicly that Cyrus hadn't stolen anything. The video appeared to show him running away when he was shot. Visuals formed. The community treated this as an open and shut case of a man killing a child over 4 bottles of water, and reasonably so based on what was known at the time. Then it went to trial, and the picture got more complicated. The defense argued Chow fired to protect his son, who testified Cyrus pointed a gun at him. Jurors saw a screenshot from a video just a day before the shooting, holding the same 9mm pistol, and under cross-examination, the lead investigator on the case confirmed something else too. Reviewing the store's own footage showed Cyrus actually putting the water bottles back. He hadn't stolen anything, and there's no evidence he ever pointed the gun at anyone that night either. Both sides are true at once. In June 2026, the jury
State of South Carolina, County of Richland versus Chike Rick Chow. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Chike Rick Chow, as to the charge of murder, not guilty.
Here's the pattern worth naming across each and every case in this video. Trey Reed, Karmelo Anthony's victim, Nolan Wells, Cyrus Carmack-Belton. For any trial, any investigation, any autopsy finished, each of these young men got flattened into a symbol. Either an angel who did nothing wrong, or on the other side, someone whose flaws get treated as justification. Cyrus didn't steal anything. He was also a 16-year-old that had a gun on him that he had been showing off on social media just the day before. Neither fact cancels out the other, and neither one required rushing to a conclusion before the evidence was in. I just want to be direct about something before I close out. I feel for every one of these families. Nothing in this video is meant to minimize a real human loss. But I think we do something dangerous when we make skin color the default lens to every one of these tragedies before any of the facts are known. If everything is racism, then nothing's racism. The word stops meaning anything. In the actual cases where it's real, it gets harder to see through the noise. Let the system do its job. Ask hard questions when the history earns them, but let the evidence, not the assumption, decide what happens. And here's what these 4 cases actually have in common. And it's not race, and it's not politics, it's timing. In the Reed case, the questions were legitimate. The history behind it was real, and the system actually did its job. Investigators looked, and they found no evidence of foul play. The problem wasn't that people asked. The problem is that for a lot of people, the asking never stopped being the answer. And it didn't change a single mind that had already made a decision within the first 48 hours. So in the case with Anthony, the racial framing showed up before a single witness had testified. And when the actual trial happened, when an actual jury sat through the actual testimony, the outcome had nothing to do with any of that. It came down to what the evidence showed about what happened in the seconds before the knife came out. 35 years, murder unanimously. The framing wasn't just wrong, it was irrelevant. It never had anything to do with the actual answer. And in the Wells case, we're still living through the experiment in real time. No conclusions yet. Not a photo, not a theory on top of that photo, and now a family, a community, and frankly a country arguing about a case where the coroner hasn't even finished the job. So why does this keep happening? I'm going to break them down why I think it keeps happening. So first, speed sells and patience doesn't. The platforms that show you this content are optimizing for engagement, and outrage is the single most reliable engagement driver there is. A calm post that says, "We don't know yet, let's wait for," gets a fraction of the reach of a post that says, "Here's who's responsible," or "Breaking news, we have new evidence of what happened." The algorithm doesn't care if you're right, it cares if you stayed. Second, once a narrative exists, it's a lot easier to keep believing it than to update it. Changing your mind in public feels like losing. Doubling down feels like winning, even when the facts have already moved on without you. And third, this is the part the grift is really about. There's money and attention in being the loudest voice on the right side of an unresolved tragedy, whichever side that turns out to be. Fundraisers get bigger when there's a villain attack. Followings grow faster around certainty than around let's wait and see. That doesn't mean everyone speaking up is doing this cynically. Plenty of people are speaking from real grief, real fear, or a real earned distrust built from history. But it does mean the incentives in the room are almost never pointed towards patience. And to be clear, this cuts every direction. Sometimes a snap judgment turns out to match the eventual evidence. And when that happens, it does not retroactively make the judgment good reasoning. It means the person guessed right. Calling it early is still calling it before you actually knew. What we're actually building case after case is a habit of skipping the slow part and rewarding whatever shouts the confident answer first. And a habit like that doesn't just cost us the truth. All of us to do it faster and more confidently the next time, on the next name, in the next tragedy that shows up on our feed before the facts do. And here's the thing though, none of that means don't ask questions. By all means ask them. Ask them loudly if you need to. History has earned all of us the right to be suspicious when something looks wrong, especially in the Reed case. But there's a difference between asking questions and refusing to accept the answer once it comes back. There's a difference between demanding an investigation and rejecting its findings just because they're inconvenient to the story you've already liked better. Evidence first, conclusion second, every time. No exceptions, no matter whose side it helps or hurts. That's the only version of justice that actually works. For Trey Reed's family, for Austin Metcalf's family, for Karmelo's family, for Nolan Wells' family, and for Cyrus Carmack-Belton's family. For every name we've already heard, and for every name we haven't heard yet. If we want the system to get it right, we have to be willing to let it finish the job before we decide we already know what it's going to say. Stop the grift, people, and let's wait for the facts. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe. It helps us out tremendously. But above all else, be sure to share because it helps to get the content out and touches somebody else with the information. As always, people, much love to each and every one of you, and until next time, I'm out.